Good evening and welcome. My name is Abby Wright. I'm the Director of Student Services. It's a pleasure to have you here. It is my honor tonight to welcome Dr. Aaron Krasnow. He is the Associate Vice President of Health and Counseling Services at Arizona State University and an Arizona licensed psychologist. He has worked in the field of mental health and higher education for nearly 20 years, with a focus on creating accessible and healthy educational opportunities for youth and adults. Please welcome Dr. Krasnow.
Hi, everybody. Hear me okay? I can see you almost okay. I'm going to be wandering around the stage, mostly just so I can make eye contact with most of you. If those of you who are in the back want to move forward, we will all watch you do it. That's how it works, right? I'm not going to force you to do it. We will watch you do it. If some of you in the front now want to take an opportunity to move to the back, fine too. So it's my pleasure. I'm honored to be here today. An important topic that I'm glad to dialogue with you about, and I would like this. I think we can even pull it off in a room that's 900 seats big. A little bit of a give and take, and then at the end I'll hang out. Sometimes people want to talk about something in particular or something that I referenced, and we can go from there, but I'll save time for some Q&A as well. So intro was exactly right. That is who I am. I've spent my career really in that intersection of education and emotional and physical well-being. I didn't really know that that's where I was going to end up. I thought I was going to be an engineer, and then I visited some engineering schools, and I had no idea what any of the other students were talking about on the tour. We would be walking around. I was with my dad, and they would be asking questions that likely were about engineering stuff, but I didn't really know that. And so I remember we were at Rensselaer Polytechnic in upstate New York, and the tour made a left around a corner in a lab, and we just stayed behind the corner and ditched the tour, and they went on their way, and I don't even know, now I work at a university, and I can just imagine what they thought. They're like, what happened to those people? But so we're driving home. I grew up in Vermont. We're driving home. It's about an 8-hour drive from there to where I lived, and I remember just really panicking, and I thought I wanted to be an engineer, but this doesn't feel right, and things like that. So my dad's talking to me. He's like, well, what is it that you thought why would you want to be an engineer? And what I really wanted to do is I wanted to build prosthetics. That was in my head. I want to build prosthetics. So he's like, why do you want to do that? And it wasn't because I was interested in robots. It wasn't because I was interested really in any of the other. There was something about the building of advanced prosthetics that led to somebody's life changing and being something that would allow them to achieve things that they might not have otherwise been able to achieve, or solve problems for them that was really interesting to me. And he says, well, there's other careers like that. So we started just kicking around those things. And that's how I ended up basically taking psychology courses, because there was the least amount of math requirements associated with that major, and also had the intersection of helping people with their things. So since that day, that became my freshman year at the University of Vermont, I kind of kept building a psychology career. But I've had all sorts of different roles in psychology and education, and I find myself in this really privileged position in this current role and being able to speak to folks like you, where we're really taking a broader look at what ails our societies. I don't do direct service in the same way anymore. That was an important part of my career, and I was glad to do it, to provide direct care to college students or others. But now I get to be in this more supervisory, advanced strategy space, and also get to have these kind of conversations in which I'm dialoguing with families or districts or teachers or other educators about how we tackle some of the most pressing issues. And so that's me, and that's why I keep doing this stuff, because it still goes back to that day, my junior year in high school, when I ditched the tour, which is all I want to do is try and advance other people's opportunity to achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve in their life. So onward we go. So we're talking about youth mental health, and you don't have to even be that savvy a media consumer to know that the media is paying attention. In fact, there's media paying attention right now. Hi, everybody. Wave at the media. Some of you were even interviewed by them earlier. The media is paying attention because it is real. There's an interesting movement right now in the media's portrayal of youth mental health crises There was a period of time about 5 years ago where it was all like the sky is falling. And it's just like everything's a crisis. It's all terrible. Then a couple years ago, it moved into like it's pretty bad, and some people are trying to figure this out. And now we're in a really good space, open space that's much healthier as a society, which is there are real solutions, and there are real things that we can do. And we can host events like this, and we can be in these dialogues. We don't have to just absorb the pain and the suffering and the difficulty and then just wait for something magical to happen. And we also don't have to just bandy about like searching for solutions. There are real solutions available to us that we can adopt, or we can invent them ourselves. And that's amazing. The reasons for this circumstance are not crystal clear. I'm going to talk about some of that. And of course, the solutions are not straightforward. They take all of us working on that. And I really look forward to you all telling me your ideas and how we can move things forward. So the reality is, though, as we think about the reasons these things are happening, is there's a lot of blame going around. So we have a small enough group here, and I can see all of you. I'm a little blinded by that one, but I can see all of you. Who wants to throw your hand up and yell out what you've heard, the reason, the blame about why it is that youth are struggling with mental health in ways that they might not have before? Yes? So technology, devices, forcing them, that was a very loaded sentence. Technology, devices, forcing, isolation. All four of those matter, and you line them all up. So, and then, therefore, related to increases in some of the symptomology. Good. Okay, what other blame? Parenting. Yeah, so tell me more. Yeah, what about them? The helicopter parents. Yeah, so the idea of helicopter parenting, if people couldn't hear it, the idea of helicopter parenting is hovering over them or over something, over someone, managing, monitoring, not letting them make mistakes, you said in there. There's helicopter parents, there's lawnmower parents. They'll just run you right over and chop you to pieces. There's all this. So parents are blamed often. What else? Social media, so not just the devices, but like maybe what the devices are capable of. What about social media? Yeah, so the social media, you don't know what's real and what's not. You don't know, and particularly young people might not be able to be good at discriminating the difference between sort of a cultivated profile and one that's not. By the way, adults aren't very good at that either, but children are especially bad at that. And so social media has some toxicity in that regard is one of the things that's blamed. What else? Yeah. Yeah. What about rapid change is to blame?
Part of growing up is, building a foundation, knowing what you can believe in and trust, and things are just changing so rapidly that just when a kid or a parent gets comfortable with something, it turns 180 degrees around.
Absolutely. So the idea that there's rapid change in our society and it's accelerating is really, really, it's true, and then often is pointed to as the blame. What was thought of as like how you would understand like a generation of young people was often, 20 years, 15 years, and now it kind of feels like 5 years. Like for those of you who have children of different ages, you can see like how different that child is and what they grow up around versus one that's 5 years older or 5 years younger. Or if you work in education, you can see like, yes, freshmen in high school and seniors in high school or freshmen in college and seniors in college have always been different, but they seem like they're from different planets now because they're engaging with the world in such radically different ways. They're consuming information in such radically different ways in such a short period of time. What else? What else is to blame? Yes? Yeah, traumatic experiences. So there's a heightened sensitivity to the fact that many people, and especially children, have experienced trauma, particularly in childhood, and then that has these cascading impacts, and so that's been to blame. Another thing that's into blame is kids these days, right? Has anybody heard like basically the generation, like this iGen or Gen Z, like something's wrong with them? Or like I was on the radio last week and the question was like, when parents ask like, is everybody just like a snowflake now? And that term is out there, like people are coddled, maybe it's because of parenting, or they don't know how to relate to other people, maybe because of technology, but there's just like something wrong with them. And so that blaming of kids is really pervasive. And we don't have a lot of kids in the room right now, but I saw a couple. but they can feel that. They feel that blame. They'll say it to us when we talk to them. They can feel like they are, that the social context, the depression and anxiety increases are somehow their fault. Even if we might not always say that out loud, that's enough in the ether. And that's actually pretty common. And so I'm going to play a little game with you just to test this theory. It'll be easy for you because you're a well-informed group. So, indulge me in this easy one. Sometimes I do this for groups that are not as involved, but, bear with me. I'm gonna name some quotes that are from like op-eds, like media reports. Keep talking about the media. Where's our media guy? I'm gonna name some things that I've seen in op-eds, and I want you to guess the generation. Okay, and I'm gonna put up which generation. So we're gonna vote. You tell me which one it is. A little game, be easy. Okay, actual quotes, just to show what's in the ether. Too close with their mothers. Mothers get a lot of blame. Too close with their mothers. Selfish and self-involved. Too focused on technology. Lack sufficient work ethic, lazy. Unmotivated to achieve. Okay? Too close with their mothers, selfish, technology, lack work ethic, unmotivated to achieve. All right, here are your choices. This will be easy. Here are your choices. The greatest generation, right? So this is the generation that fought in World War II or surrounded the war effort in our country. So born between 1901 and 24, ends up around teenage to 20s around the time of World War II. The silent generation, which almost nobody in here has heard of, and that's why they're called that. And so we don't need to spend a bunch of time on them, but that's the group right after World War II. Baby boomers, we've heard of them. There's some boomers in the room. Generation X, I'm a Gen Xer. Yep, some Gen X. Yeah, go Gen X. Millennials, up to about 2004. Again, these numbers aren't perfect, but millennials is that group. These are like a little bit of college left, and then people after college, kind of the early 20s, early 30s. And then Gen Z, iGen, so if you have children in school right now, this is how they're naming your generation. If you have like kindergartners, whether they'll be part of that, it's hard to tell right now, but like the middle school to college age right now. Okay, so those are your choices. Too close with their mother, too wrapped up in technology, no work ethic, what it is. Who thinks it's the greatest generation? Put a show of hands. Okay. Silent, we'll move on. We got one back there. We got one person voting for it. For greatest generation, was that your vote? Okay, you're on the record. Okay, on the record. Baby boomers, got a couple Gen Xers naming their parents. Millennials, who thinks this is describing millennials? All right, that's a majority opinion right there. And then, and then who thinks Generation Z? Okay, a couple people. Maybe a Gen Zer right there. Nice job. Yep. Takes one to know one, buddy. So, well, the reality is these quotes were about the GI generation, the greatest generation. So these were quotes that I pulled from newspaper articles written about that group of people when they were young. Too close with their mothers, too wrapped up in technology. Do you know what technology they were wrapped up in? Radio. So when radio came out and it became popular in American households, it was as if all of society was going to end. And the stories that were told was like, this is destroying the fabric of a family. Now people come home, and instead of farming or whatever it is that they were doing before, they gather around this box, and a disembodied voice speaks to them, and they don't relate to each other, and they just listen to this thing. Does that sound familiar? Right? And so, those of you who said you can relate to this in the other generations, the story has not changed. It's identical. Too close to their families. Around this time, there's a big change in America as it relates to where the population centers were and how the American family changed. Also around this time is when public schools started to form, and a little bit later than that, as children were less likely to be in factories because the laws associated with child labor had changed, and there were fewer farming communities, right? So we had to do something with these children, and so they would go to school. So everything's changing, and you get this like too close with their mothers. Well, children prior to that didn't talk to their mothers. That wasn't part of the engagement of family. So the family structure changed, and now they're being shamed for having a relationship with their mother. Technology I already talked about, sufficient work ethic. Now, look how times have changed. That generation in the United States is lionized as the most selfless. They defeated the Nazis, right? The most selfless, whether you fought in the war or changed your life to work in a factory or any of those things that happened in our country, they were seen as completely antithetical to this stereotyping. And yet this stereotyping persists today because there was enough diversity, and credit to you for voting for the right one. This happens to every generation. It has not changed. It will not change. The reason it won't change is that old joke that we all tell, which is like every generation thinks the generation after them is the worst, although this time we might be right. Because so I'm Gen X. What, Gen Xers in the room, what were we called? Slackers. We're called slackers. So I don't think I've slacked in my life. Now, it's true, when I was 20, I was sitting on a couch in a flannel shirt at the University of Vermont. So I kind of fit the stereotype of a Gen Xer. But that doesn't mean that was a good representation of my generation or of me. These are stories that we tell because of the changing nature of our society, and the rapidity of that change often accelerates this. And so this is more intense now, maybe, than it was before. Plus, we have more channels to look down on a generation. In the old days, it might have just been the New York Times, which is where I pulled most of that. Now you have thousands of channels to shame iGen and millennials for their lack of work ethic, or that they're too wrapped up in their technology or any of that other stuff. So most of you did think this. And if you go on Google, it's sort of affirmed. Now, you know how Google's algorithm works. Google's algorithm works, so it's trying to guess what you're going to write. But it's not just like, guessing. Other people have written these sentences into Google, so now it's trying to guess based on that, and it's trying to put things together to give you a little head start into where you need to go. So if you type in Generation Z R, you get all sorts of stuff. Now, I don't know what this Generation Z are millennials, why so many people are typing that, because it's not true, but maybe it's very confusing out there. But then, the worst and depressed and useless and not millennials, so those people are arguing. Killing Facebook, doomed. And then look at the bottom one. Generation Z is stressed, depressed, and exam obsessed, which is a big part of what drove you to come here today, right? This thing of like, what's happening with this generation, and how are we stressing them, and how are we preoccupied with certain things and not others? And this is mainly on our mind and borne out by the evidence of Google. If you type in Generation Z will, now it's starting to look a little bit more positive, which probably means a lot of Gen Z people are using Google. They're like, we're gonna tackle this thing, transform the future of the workplace, and pay, these things. Well, then I was like, that's nice about Gen Z. I'm like, let's look at millennials. They've caught in a lot of grief. You millennials in the audience, from what I speak, you've caught in a lot of heat in your life. So millennials are killing these brands. I don't know what brands. Losers. Killing the doorbell industry. How dare you? How dare you kill the doorbell industry? It's probably like the GI generation killed the horse and buggy industry. If Google existed back then, it probably would have said that. You're growing horns, apparently. This was interesting. I wrote, millennials are so helpless. How about that one? Millennials are sociopaths. I was using it as the word so, but most people are like, millennials are really sociopathic. And then I spelled millennials wrong, and Google still knew what I meant. I didn't catch this until after I made the slide. But millennials are ruining. Look what millennials are apparently ruining. The wine industry. They're ruining Applebee's. I haven't been in Applebee's in a while, but now I'm afraid to go because it's like probably ruined. Ruining brunch. You ruined Halloween Fox, whatever that is. Is there a Halloween Fox? So this is borne out. This is like pervasive in the environment. So why do we do this? Why do we engage in this? It's critical as we move into like, what are we going to do to support our children? We engage in it because there's a tendency as humans to do something called the confirmation bias, which is we seek information that confirms something we already believe. It's why we're in the political challenges we're in right now. It's like everybody's existing in an echo chamber, and some of the technology exacerbates that, but we also have a human tendency to seek that, to be confirmed by it. And so if I believe that Generation Z is too wrapped up in their technology, and then I see a child on an iPad, it confirms the thing I already believe. I don't know anything about why that child's on that iPad. I don't know anything at all, but it confirms this preconceived notion that I have. We also do engage in what's called the vividness effect, which is things that are more vivid, are more memorable, more noticeable. So I'll confess one to you. So I have this thing about people walking around in public, like FaceTiming while walking around. You've seen people do that? Maybe you do that, right? So they're like video chatting while walking around. It drives me crazy. Like I look at it, I'm like, it's so rude. Like I turn into like the oldest man. I'm like, oh, I hate it, and kids these days, and invariably I get most annoyed because they're younger than me, which increasingly is most people, and so I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, I just don't like it, and because it's so vivid and it confirms things that I deeply held. But the reality is that there's no actual difference between a person talking to someone else on a video and them talking to someone next to them. I can't even reasonably make a case where there's a difference, because I can't say like, I don't need to hear your conversation. Well, I can hear your conversation if you're talking to another person walking down the street. I've just sort of attuned myself through my life of that's not what I'm intending to, but this somehow is distracting me because it's so vivid. But if I just tuned into your conversation and you were next to me, I can hear your conversation. It's just two people talking. But there's something about it that really gets to me, and its vividness and its confirmation are there. And it's not really their problem, it's my problem. But I know based on how, when I said this and some of the nods I got, some of you have the same bias. So there's the availability heuristic, which is just easier to think of whole generations of people as something. It's just harder to see differences. It's harder to be more nuanced in our conversations. It's just be like, you know how millennials, they're ruining Applebee's, right? It's just an easier thing. It's like, it's a talking point for us, particularly amongst between generations. It allows us to join other people in our generation and really slander those people who are not in our generation, which is the ethnocentrism of generations. It's in-group, out-group stuff, right? So if I'm around a bunch of Gen Xers, we can vibe on what is our parents, and then, kids these days be like, my day, and you hear yourself talking like this, be like, well, they don't know what hard work is, those people who defeated the Nazis, right? It's like you engage in this stuff, and you're like, oh, and all of this is just human psychology. This is just a tendency of us, but I'm highlighting it because everyone in this room, because you're a human, is engaging in this. And when you're aware of your tendency to engage in these behaviors, you can catch yourself doing it and you can back up. You can be like, oh, well, this is me doing that thing. I have a bias about younger people because it's changing so fast and I don't necessarily know what's happening. I have a bias because it's very vivid. It's confirming something that I want. It doesn't mean you're wrong necessarily, but it doesn't mean you're right. And it gives us a chance to slow down enough and notice these biases in ourselves so that when we're approaching young people, our children especially, we have a way to relate to them that is not infected by some of this really natural human behavior, but we have enough awareness of it, we can kind of short circuit it. But yet, this current generation, iGen, has some significant challenges that are real. There are rising rates of depression and anxiety, suicidal thoughts, self-injury. Those are true data points. And so in the most recent APA Stress in America survey, when they're surveying teenagers, young adults, middle-aged adults, older adults, they ask them, what are your top stressors? And the top stressors for young people, teenagers right now, way more than any other generation, are these social issues: gun violence, climate change, immigration, and interpersonal violence. These are stressing them at rates very different than any other generation right now. So I care about all four of those issues, but I'm not stressed at the rate that young people are generationally. I could be individually stressed by that differently, but as a group, my generation versus theirs, as a group, they have a higher anxiety, higher stress about those things. They're more preoccupied with it than, let's say, my generation or others. There's rising income inequality, which creates pressure on all this stuff. And then there's the impact of technology, as we talked about already, both the good and the bad of technology. And I'm going to get into that in a second. So Gene Twenge wrote a book not too long ago called iGen. There's a lot of good, what I would call correlational data in this. It's not causal, it's not saying like this caused this, but she highlights some important stuff. Like the advent of smartphone use in America, the introduction of the iPhone and then its pervasive use is related. We don't know the direction of the relationship, but is related to all sorts of problematic changes in young people's behavior. Not hanging out with friends away from your parents by itself for an individual may not be bad, but as a group, it's restricting opportunity to engage in some additional social skill building that those of us who weren't in that circumstance had to do earlier than later. So it doesn't mean that this generation won't build that, but they're building it maybe later. So it's kind of like a delayed adolescence in that regard, related to social skills and hanging out with friends away from your parents. And you can see how it tracks with when the iPhone was released. More likely to feel lonely. Loneliness is upstream of all sorts of mental health issues, and it's also downstream of those issues. So mental health issues can cause loneliness, and loneliness can cause those issues. And this generation is much more likely to report feeling lonely. And you can see how it's tracking with the introduction of smartphones. And then sleep is one of the also upstream and downstream of social and emotional experiences and problematic ones. And then where the iPhone's released in 2007, you see this uptick in people less likely to get sleep. So these are, again, the causal direction of this is we're not going to get into too much unless people are interested. The more important is that these things are connected somehow. They matter, and they matter at things that are very, very important for the mental health of young people, and we need to look at the technology's role in their lives. Technology has all sorts of positive benefits. I went to the University of Vermont. I grew up in Vermont. I grew up in the woods. My town had 3,000 people in it. If I was a member of a historically marginalized identity group there, and I didn't know somebody else who had a similar identity as me, I would feel utterly alone. I would actually think I was the only person on the planet who thought that way, felt that way, behaved that way, believed that way. I would be utterly alone. That is not the case anymore for many people because they're able to connect across distances. It's still difficult to be part of a group of people, whether it's a sexual orientation identity, gender identity, race, culture, class, religion, where you feel like you're alone in your community. That's still extraordinarily difficult, but more people have access to other humans who match their identities, or at least are similar, or will provide support. The other side of that coin is they're also in touch with way more toxicity associated with whoever they are. So what gets in can be support, but what also can get in is harm. And so that's a really mixed bag of technology, of the good and the bad, and that's just one example. You all have plenty of other examples. So what do we do? So now we're getting into the practical stuff. Well, here's what we're not going to do. I'm not going to do what you get a lot, even if you wanted it, even if this is why you're here. I'm not going to tell you how to parent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the complicated nature of parenting and maybe give you some mindset things to then look at how you're parenting and see how that might have influence on your child. And if you want to make adjustments with that, you do. Because parenting how-to media right now falls into three categories. All of them are kind of problematic. One is an enormous amount on skills. Here's what you do. And so I'm a parent, and I'm an anxious parent. And so I am still, but often preoccupied with reading everything I can about what to do about everything. And all you have to do is read more than one thing to see where they start to contradict. And even the books that everybody swears by, and you all have that too, you have a book you might recommend to someone else, and then they've all recommended books to you. You read those things, and you're like, okay. And then you try and do some of the things, maybe, maybe not. Actually, a lot of people read books and don't even try the things. But even when you try them, it may not instantly work, despite what's written on the back. This changed my life. I know we were the worst family, and now we're the best family, or whatever. And there's all this like how-to stuff. And most people, when they engage in the how-to part of the marketplace, they end up feeling worse about what they do. Because they end up comparing to this idealized state written down in a book, and then comparing themselves to that, and that is often very defeating because, of course, all how-tos are building over time. All skills have to be built over time, but these books, and most of the time how people consume them, it's kind of like, well, if I did the thing and it didn't work, and it's like, obviously there's something worse about me. because of it. So I hear that a lot from parents. The other is the inspiration books. I sold everything. We moved to Costa Rica. And that, my wife, she sends me those things all the time. She's like, look, they sold everything. And I was like, have you seen our stuff? Like, I don't think we generate enough money. It's like, here's our IKEA table with scratches and paint all over it. $5, we're that much closer to Costa Rica. So this idea that there's this way to be, if you just were more centered, if you're just a mindful parent, right? It's in the spiritual space. I have nothing wrong with those people. There's nothing wrong with people. It's just not useful. It's not useful for most people in terms of consumption on these issues. It might be useful as an ethic. It might be useful as a North Star. But when your child is depressed, that inspiration thing rarely leads to a parent going, I figured it out because I read, the mindful parent. They want to know, do I take them to the doctor? Do I just wait? Right? They're looking for something in that practical space. And then there's an enormous amount of shame in the media, in the parenting how-to media. A lot of blaming of children. Even books I like the How to Raise an Adult kind of books, there's an element of there, if you don't, your child will not be an adult. Right? There's an undercurrent of that in there. And I think that book's actually still pretty good. But coded messages in there is, it's up to you. We're all counting on you because I've raised an adult. And if you don't raise an adult, you've ruined it for the rest of us because now we got to take care of your baby adult, or you will. They're going to move back. God forbid your child loves you enough to want to move back. All this, that goes back to the shame space, right? If your child returns back to the nest, you've failed and they've failed, and not necessarily. Because there's cultural variables, there's also economic variables, all sorts of complicated things, but the shame industry is powerful. So I told you why. We can skip that. So what if we did this instead? What if we used our strengths, the things that I already know exist in this room, and what if we parent through those strengths? So the first one is, what if we used our sense of humor? I'm going to go through these in depth. Build upon our natural human capacity for empathy. Really trust our gut, which that's advice you've gotten a million times, trust your gut, but I'm going to show you what I mean. Because that's sort of trite advice. You know what? You're the parent, trust your gut. You're like, well, there's lots of stuff that I trusted my gut on and I was totally wrong, right? And so it's how do I know what part of my gut? So attunement's a little bit different than that. Well, I went 1, 2, 2. I obviously wasn't being very mindful while making these slides. Those are tied for second most important. And then all of us have a desire for personal growth. I know that because you're here tonight. So there was something else you could have done other than this. So some of you got a babysitter. Some of you confessed that to me. Some of you got a babysitter. And what you could have done was use the opportunity to have a babysitter and gone to dinner. You probably passed the casual pint on your way here. It's right down the street. So you could have gone there instead of this, but you desired personal growth. You want to grow as a person. All of you chose to do this because this can't be the most fun thing you could have done. And there's other things you could have done instead as responsibilities. And so I know that's in the room and we're going to capitalize on that. Now I got 5. And then there's advocacy. And now at the end, we're going to talk about what you can do as parents to advocate for your children and other children to solve these things on a macro level. I'm going to give you some advice in that regard. So let's find some humor. So this wasn't very hard to do. I just went on Twitter to look for some people commenting about parenting, so I'll just put them up there. I can relate to this one. Yeah, me too. I showed this one to my wife while both of us were on our phones texting about whether we should let our kid watch YouTube. So I like these and they're relatable because if we don't have a sense of humor about our circumstances, we don't really understand why it is that we do the things that we do and don't really have grace and appreciation for that. We're just constantly shaming ourselves or shaming each other into an idealized state that we can't achieve. And so laughing at ourselves is very, very good for parents. It's increasingly rare, or sometimes we'll do it like in a fit of sort of like shrieking hysterics. Like it's all so bad and you just like burst out crying, laughing, like that whole thing. Like we can laugh at ourselves way before we're dissolved into a puddle on the floor, laughing like a lunatic. Like we can back up and be like, this is absurd. Earlier tonight, the gentleman from the news he said to me, why is this so difficult? Like, why? And I said to him, parenting's extraordinarily hard. And he was like, waiting for me to say something else? I went, that's it. It is ridiculous. It is absurdly difficult. It is, if you described it to somebody else, you would stop halfway between. You'd be like, well, I've said enough, right? Because I'm going to go on and on. The things that we've done to try and raise people, even if we're not a parent, just being parent adjacent, is ridiculous. And you would never do this thing except for all the reasons to do it, and we should laugh at that. And we should help each other find humor in it. So there are communities that do that really well. Our online, like Facebook groups and things like that, are not particularly good at this. They actually make things a lot less they're humorless if you trade in those spaces. It's a lot of like, I've got this problem with my, what's the vernacular, like DD or DS, like darling daughter, is that right? Darling son, in these things. I've got this problem, and then it's a bunch of like super advice, or it's kind of that like, you got this, mama. It's like, well, no, I obviously don't, because I just spent 4 paragraphs telling you that I'm not going to. And there's opportunities in these online spaces and in each other to actually short circuit that and just joke around a little bit more about it, because it is so hard. Okay, so now let's think about empathy and perspective taking. So empathy is a skill, but it's born out of a human capability that almost all humans have. Not all of them, but almost all humans have. There's this developmental period in which we figure out as children that my mind and your mind are different. Like I start to understand that you have your own thoughts and can see things with your own eyes, and I have my own thoughts and can see things with my own eyes. And that's not automatic. Early on, children can't do that. So this in developmental psychology, it's called theory of mind. So the idea is that I have a theory that you have a mind, and I have a mind, and there's a period in which that develops. And so developmental psychologists had to figure out how to determine when that happens, because it's very difficult to interview a child and be like, do you think I have thoughts? And they're like, what? When you look at me, do you imagine that I have my own internal world? Like, you just can't ask children that and not that young. So you got to devise like an experiment to do it. So here's how these amazingly clever developmental psychologists did it. They built this mountain playset. And it has each side is all different. Like one side, there might be like a goat and a barn and a little bit of snow on the top of the mountain. On the other side, there might be a waterfall and a lake and a cow or whatever. I don't really know if it was a goat or a cow. It was a long time ago that I was in graduate school, but whatever. Bear with me. Goat and a cow on one side, river, barn on the other. And they bring in children at different ages, and then they let the kid kind of play with the mountain playset. And the kid is verbal, so they can talk to them about what they see, and they're like, what's this thing? Oh, it's a barn. And what's that thing? It's a goat. So they can name the stuff. And they explore the whole side, and each side is different. And then, and it's a very tall mountain, so then they have the child sit on one side of the mountain, and then the interviewer sits on the other side of the mountain. They can see each other around the mountain. And the interviewer says to the child, what do you see on your side of the mountain? And the child can name it. I see a goat and a barn. And then they say, and what do I see on my side of the mountain? And there's an age in which the child can say what I, because they know what's on that side because they were over there, can say, you see a cow and a lake. And there's an age where they can't. And so that's when the theory of mind develops, the ability to take the perspective of the other. Theory of mind is the basis for empathy. I have to know that the other person has their own thoughts and feelings in order to be empathic towards them. Empathy is different than sympathy. Sympathy is kind of an intellectual understanding of what you're going through. Empathy is the capacity to feel it and feel it with you and communicate that I also recognize that you are feeling those things. and do so in a way that you, as the person that I'm empathizing with, can feel that, to know that I'm being authentic and honest. And so that's empathy, and it's built on that theory of mind. And what we can do with children is we can remind ourselves and we can seek to see their side of the mountain. A parenting challenge for us is we will start with our side of the mountain. And then maybe we'll ask them what they think or what they feel. And so we, in many ways, are short-circuiting this ability that all of us have, which is to see their side of the mountain, to see, like, tell me how you saw that. So there's all sorts of advice that this goes with technology. If you see something problematic on your child's phone or their tablet, a lot of parents will rush in, me included, I did it this morning, and then tell the child that it's inappropriate, which is really my side of the mountain and not particularly empathic, and I have no idea what he thinks of that thing. I don't even know if he understands what it is that he just saw. I could have started from his side of the mountain. Hey, what's that? Because maybe he'll describe it exactly as it is, or maybe he'll describe it completely differently. I've already judged what it is. I've already told him what it is, and now I have no way to retreat from there to find out what his thoughts are even about it. Because maybe he's scared by it, or maybe he's not bothered at all by it. Maybe he didn't even notice it. And we can pause on it. So that's something we're just kind of, before you get into all the complexity of empathy and struggling with another person's difficulty, pausing long enough to remember this talk and this idea of their side of the mountain and saying, start with them describing their experience before we interject ours. Because I don't have to maybe tell you what's on my side of the mountain. Sometimes the child will be able to say what's on their side of the mountain, and you say, how do you think I might see this? And they'll surprise you with what they'll tell you. Because sometimes they'll tell you exactly what they think, what you're thinking, and sometimes not. Now, if they're telling you exactly what you're thinking, great, you can say, you're right. That is what I'm scared of. And you're in a dialogue there. Or maybe they're wrong, and you can say, well, actually, I was thinking, okay, I get that, but actually I was thinking this, which could surprise them because they may not be able to see your perspective yet. But you got to start there. And there's so much fear and there's so much concern about how they're doing that, again, I did it this morning. I jumped in and I told him what my concern was before I even checked with him about how he was consuming whatever it is I was worried about. There's time for that. It wasn't going to instantly harm him. So attunement. So, although I just joked about all the books and the whole parent improvement marketplace, there is an area that I do recommend, and that is keying in on human development and understanding where your child is in their development and attuning yourself to that. I was part of a research lab when I was in graduate school that looked at maternal child abuse, mothers hitting their kids. The number one predictor of mothers hitting their kids was a misunderstanding of their child's developmental capacity. What I mean by that is mothers who saw their children as developmentally older than they actually were or more capable than they actually were more likely to abuse their children. As a parent today, I think about it all the time. Because when I'm frustrated with my child and I find myself, I'm never going to hit him, but when I find myself escalating my own things, it's giving me something to retreat back to and be like, well, what's a 7-year-old supposed to be doing? What is reasonable to believe that and then even if some 7-year-olds can do that, can my 7-year-old do that? Which really is did we ever teach him how to do that? Could I ever really focus on who this human is in front of me and what he's capable of? And if he has proven capable of this before and he's not doing it now, that's one thing. But if I have no evidence that a 7-year-old could even do that, or be worried about I had a hard day, or any of that other stuff that sometimes happens when we're not attuning to the developmental level of the person, that would come up all the time in our lab. Mothers would hit their kids because the kids wouldn't be sensitive to how hard a day they had. And that idea of a child being attuned to an adult's day is late adolescence. If that. Those of you with teenagers know what I'm talking about. It's if that. But some of these mothers were thinking about it in a 4-year-old would understand that when mommy comes home after a hard day, that they should. Now that sounds bizarre, except as a parent, I bet you can relate. Not maybe to the hitting part, hopefully, but to the part where you get like, you should be able to. So what you need to do is you need to educate yourself, in my opinion, on all sorts of developmental psychology. The internet makes it so easy now, just like looking at different ages that it's appropriate to do things and immersing yourself in that. Less on how to, just know what development looks like. It also will help you if your child is struggling and knowing like, oh, this is something that maybe I want to talk to somebody about because they're not where I think they might be. I don't want you preoccupied because good developmental psychology does not put by 6 they should. They give big ranges. And so that big ranges can help slow us down. Between the ages of 5 and 9, not by 9. The ages of 7 and 11. And because there's big ranges in development. But by immersing ourselves, we get in touch with concepts like the zone of proximal development. This is one of the premier developmental psychologists of our time, Lev Vygotsky. He came up with this concept, which is our job is to push on young people a little bit harder than they currently can do, but not so hard that it overwhelms their capacity. And you know, if you're a parent in the room, you know that you can see where that's working. You can also know where you've overextended them and you've gone too far and pushed them too far, and then they retreat and they pull back, or they have the failure experience and they refuse to do it. Whether that's homework, riding a bike, doing chores in the house. All of us have these experiences of like, oh, that I kind of hit it right. And other ones where we're like, I way overshot how hard I pushed them. Overshooting is not the problem. Staying in that space is the problem. Those parents who stay saying like, I don't care, I'm going to drag them to the finish line, there's more problematic outcomes for their children. Those parents who don't do anything, who don't push at all, there's more problematic outcomes. What we want to find is, and then what that requires is to be so attuned to the other human that you're watching how they're doing, how they're feeling, backing off when you feel like in your gut it makes sense to back off, pushing a little harder when it makes sense. There's no perfect way, but the person in front of you will tell you. All right, so let's talk personal growth. This gets a little hairy. A lot of, particularly as you see online and other things, a lot of the issues that I hear as a professional and then doing this kind of stuff from parents about how to parent are actually their issues, not their child's issues. And the desire for control, the desire to make this go right is born out of the fears that we all have that something's going to go wrong. It's more acute in some people than others, but control is an effect of that. And I'm an anxious parent, so I have to work on my tendency to hover like a helicopter. I have to observe myself doing it. I have to helicopter above my helicopter. And we'd be like, oh, you're overly monitoring this thing. Back up. Those are your issues, not his. And if you keep doing it, it's going to hurt him. Also, the isolation that children are telling us about themselves is true about us as parents, too. And I use these Facebook groups as an example. So much of the online conversation amongst parents about parenting looks to me like these people have nobody to talk to. And I know that's true for the majority of us in this room. It is incredibly isolating society right now. We are on a very bad trajectory as society in terms of social isolation. It's having catastrophic impact on not just teenagers, but on middle-aged people and particularly the elderly. The United Kingdom just a few years ago named a minister of loneliness because they see this as a social problem amongst the elderly. Minister of loneliness, by the way, sounds like the worst Monty Python sketch ever. But the idea being is they recognize that they needed somebody to manage this condition of older Brits living by themselves in a tiny flat somewhere, getting money from the government and never leaving their house. And they were getting sick at a greater rate or dying at a faster rate because of that. Well, we have those same social problems in the US, and technology makes that more difficult, and our political challenges make that more difficult, and we're getting more isolated. So I read those things, and someone's just basically shouting, "Can anybody hear me? I'm struggling." And they post unbelievable things. I can't even believe sometimes with the things that people posted. People will post in a group with 100,000 members, "My husband's such an ass." I'd be like, what? Does your husband know that you posted that? Because they just have no one to talk to. So they would do something so silly like that, where they're just sort of throwing out their personal business. Maybe their husband knows, most of the time they don't. And then sometimes they'll get reflection, hey, you might not want to share that. And people will say things like, oh, he's not on Facebook, as if that's going to prevent anything from ever happening. But it's this distortion we live in this isolated society, in which we start not even understanding how social networks work or how relationships work. We have to look at that isolation and reach out to each other and give each other comfort and be able to take those risks and be vulnerable with each other to limit that isolation. Limiting that isolation will make us better parents. Not just because we'll have a babysitter, although that helps, but also because we'll be able to release some of that stress where I talked about earlier about the ridiculousness of being a parent. Because we'll be able to bring that forward to somebody else, to have someone empathize with that and help us through tough times. And then projection is I take my issues and I put it on you. And in the academic achievement space, as it relates to that right now, the stressed, depressed, and exam obsessed, most of the academic achievement challenges that are happening in America related to preoccupation with like AP and other things like that, those are adults projecting those things onto children. It's not the children themselves who came up with it. You know what I'd like? These are adults who've created these systems. We're projecting them onto children because of our beliefs about what school they should go to or what it means to achieve and all that other stuff, despite all evidence to the contrary. So we're doing it to them, and we have to look at that. We have to grow through that. All right, so advocacy. And then I'll go through this, and then if there's questions, I would love to hear them. So you also exist in a very powerful space as parents and members of this community, any community. Your voice matters, and you can push for things. And so I'm going to give you some recommendations of things that I think we should all push for. We can treat mental health issues as a diversity and inclusivity issue, not only a problem to be managed away, not only something to find and fix, but actually part of the diversity of our society. That some people are struggling at different times, and some people have different neuro capacities, and some people, because it's all of us. Some people have experienced traumatic events. Some people have not. Some people grow up in families in which they're struggling economically, and some people have not. And all of that downstream is all sorts of other impacts on our social and emotional well-being. And if we look at that as part of the fabric of our community, we destigmatize those challenges and we make it part of who we are. That some of us will struggle with some things at different times, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they don't deserve our help. We don't just look at it and be like, live and let live, because that's not inclusivity. That's tolerance. I'll get to that in a second. Inclusivity is like, and they're our responsibility. We're part of this together. We can do this in policy. We should look at all our school policies, all of our community policies, all of our municipal policy, our laws, and look at how this is playing out in the social and emotional lives of our children and ourselves. Where is it that we're restricting access in ways that are intended or unintended? And change those things. There's movement right now in the state of Arizona in that regard. I'm very proud. I've been here a long time. It wasn't always the case where you could kind of push through legislation in municipalities or at the state level that would be in the service of things that we're looking at now, like mandatory training for mental health. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Yeah, we're not 100% sure how that's going to go. Yeah, there's not really budgets that are going to work attached to that. But it's a line drawn in the sand that says we are not going to exist in an environment in which people who are responsible for children's well-being are not trained in children's well-being. That's a gigantic advance for Arizona, and I'm proud of us for doing that. We can recognize that the history of marginalization still affects our groups and affects them majorly and affects them differently. And that part of our communities are people who have experienced these things at greater intensity or greater numbers than some others of us. And then we can recognize that, affirm that, recognize it, and seek to change it. It's not enough to not be racist. We must be anti-racist. It's not enough to be not sexist. We must be anti-sexist. It's not enough to be tolerant of mental health difficulties in our environment. We must seek to change those things. Now, this group, you're already there, but not everybody is. And that's our advocacy, to say we need to take an active role. There's no cavalry coming. We're it. And so you're on the front line of that because you chose to come here today. And a whole bunch of other people did not. And so we need to help them get to that space that you got to so that we can advance. All right, let's talk tolerance, acceptance, and celebration of strengths. So one of the things I'm proud of with your school, I've been a part of it a few times, your district, and others, is that they're really moving towards the celebration of strengths of the community. We've moved past, for the most part in our society, believing that tolerance is enough. It's not just that I acknowledge that it's okay for you to exist. It actually is not even where I accept you. I need to be celebrating who you are, and I also should expect the celebration of who I am at the same time. And when we get to that point in society, issues like mental health issues just look like part of a lived experience. They're not as intense. They can get intense, but in general, they're not as intense because it's like, yeah, she has bad days, and here's how I help her. As opposed to, she said, get to the therapist. Or she said, that's her problem. It's, she said, what do I do to help her? Because she has value. I celebrate who she is. I want her part of this community. I don't want her just not to be depressed. I want her. And that's a shift. Because a lot of the stuff is really focused on minimization of the symptomology, and this shift is maximization of the human, of which sometimes they have difficulty. So we can do these things that are proven to help. We can build community better. That's what we're doing tonight. We can try and limit certain language. I struggled with this tonight. I put this on the slide, and I'm still a work in progress. I even called something crazy tonight, and I'm working to try not to do it. But I'm not there yet. But I can keep working at it. There's certain words we've eliminated. We know we can do this. Because if anybody says the R word right now around children or around us, for the most part, it rings like a bell, and we see it as problematic. So we have a history of succeeding here, plus all sorts of other words. We can get there when it comes to things like crazy or insane. I'm not there yet, obviously. I'm working hard, but I'm not there. And replace it with other things. Well, one thing, when we say like, wow, the traffic was crazy, we can replace that with the traffic was bad or it took a long time. Like, we don't have to use that word. It's just built into it right now. And a lot of times people are like, well, what else am I going to use? Well, they made that same case for the R word or calling things gay. We have transcended that. We're better than that. And we can be better than this. I can be better than this. We can learn and teach micro skills. Everybody in this room knows some micro skill on how to calm down or center yourself or something like that. We were doing a talk with some high school students about how they can take a more active role in their community. And one of the students was like, wait a minute, I know how to do four-corner breathing. And everybody in the room was like, what's four-corner? I mean, I knew what it was. I'm a psychologist. She said, she's like, I know how to do four-corner breathing. And everybody's like, what's that? And then she taught everybody, and it took 20 seconds. And now everybody in that room is fundamentally changed because they learned a really critical breathing technique that helps calm you down when you're feeling anxious. It's a really good grounding technique if you're triggered and you have a history of trauma. It's fantastic. It took 20 seconds. And so in that regard, all of us have these things. We can put ourselves out there and teach each other this stuff. These micro skills exist already in our community. You don't need a psychologist to teach you that. I can. Yes, I will. Not yet. Yeah, I will. And then, finally, before I get to the rest, before I teach you and then the rest of it, we can adopt a public health model to all that we do. This is a mindset. You can even apply it to your family, but let's apply it to like a school or a municipality. What do all of us need to do and know? What do some of us need to do and know? And what do a few of us need to do and know? So I've kind of mapped it out with a little thing here. So if you think of like a school, students, teachers, staff, families, community, alumni. That's who's connected to a school. What's good for all, what's relevant for all, what could all do, where can all help, what's relevant for some, what's relevant for a few, okay? So here's some examples. So if you're doing things on mental health, awareness campaigns are good for everybody. Anti-stigma campaigns, social norming. Social norming is giving people facts about something juxtaposed next to some other thing that they already might believe that's different than the facts. I'll give you one from ASU. It's less than it used to be, but it's still there, that sometimes people think that at ASU that our alcohol use rates are high for a university. We're actually nationally in the lower end. And so for example, for underage students, it's below 30%. have used alcohol in the last 12 months. And for all age students, it's just north of half. And that's for graduate students of every age, right? So including everybody over 21. So I share that, and I know what happens in groups. Immediately, many people in the audience immediately doubt everything I just said. They're like, well, that can't possibly be true. There's no way that's true. Your data's something wrong with your sampling. People are lying. So there's one person in this room who knows how the survey works, who's responsible for the data, and is responsible for its accuracy relative to national norms. Who's that person? Me. None of you are in that seat, but some of you don't believe me. Because the perception, back to the biases, the perception that you have is so powerful. So I can't convince you, because, using the vernacular of nowadays times, people are like, well, that's fake news, right? So this idea, like, I'm giving you a fact, and you're like, nope. And I'd be like, well, how do you think that? You'd be like, I heard, or when like any Sun Devils in here? Any graduates? Yeah. Well, you didn't, some of you may have graduated recently, but some of you didn't, right? And so when I was there, well, I didn't say zero, right? So we use all of that inside of us to then doubt facts. So that doesn't work. What we have to do is a social norming campaign, which does this. Simultaneously, when we tell parents at orientation and students when we're welcoming to the university these facts about alcohol use, we also show them the data that we collect on the perceptions of alcohol use. So we ask students, how many of you have had this much alcohol in the last year? They tell us. And then we ask them, in addition, how many of your peers, how many college students are drinking? So the rate of underage use is south of 30%. They perceive it to be 92%, just like you. So we put those side by side. That does some powerful stuff. One, it forces them to reconcile their own report, because it's not make-believe, it's their data. We ask students like you say this here, you say this here, which negates the whole worry about the sampling error, because they relate to the 92. They're like, yeah, we thought everybody, and then they're like, well, then how do you explain this? It does another powerful thing that's really important in these kinds of public health campaigns. When you are a non-drinker and you come to college, you're in a more than 70% majority. You think you're in an 8% minority. So what does that do to your experience? You feel isolated. You're more likely to drink. It's difficult to find other people because everybody you're perceiving them mostly incorrectly. So you have 70% of people mostly misreading the environment about other people doing the same behavior, or the lack of the behavior in this case, as them, which increases risk and it increases isolation. So by showing them this, we short circuit some of that. And we say, it's very difficult to see a non-drinker. It's really easy to see a drinker. I can prove it right now. If I did this talk, and you, sir, were listening to me, and you were as attentive as you are right now and writing stuff down, but while you were doing it, you were swirling a martini in your hand, it would be the only thing I could focus on. I'd be giving a talk, and I'd keep looking over there, and I'd be like, oh, he likes olives instead of onions, and then he's swirling it the whole time, and I would be like laser focused on it. It would be so distracting because I can see him drinking. Because if you ask me, hey, describe the room, and I would never say, yeah, I was in this room, I was doing this talk, and nobody was drinking alcohol. People were like, yeah, obviously. But if I saw one person drinking, one person out of a room of 80 people, it would be the only thing. It would be the story I would tell forever. Later tonight, I'd be having a conversation with Katie McPherson. Katie's over there. And I would be saying to her, Katie, can you believe the guy brought a martini? It was like a whole shaker. He made it looked really good. I wanted one myself. Felt weird asking. I would tell that story forever. Every time I came in, I might, at my next gig, I might say, you might want to remind people not to bring alcohol. I would be so over-responding to it because of how vivid it is, and also with a child, with someone joining a university, they're already primed for that because, like you, they already perceive the environment wrong. So social norming campaigns compare those two things. So with things about mental health or things about struggle, things about the idea of failure, that not every test is going to go well, and all that other stuff, you got to put both the perception and the reality next to each other. Everybody thinks they're the only one who failed the test, But actually, it's pretty normal to struggle in math. And put those things side by side that so people can do the reconciliation. Because if you only share one of them, people dismiss it. If you say to people, it's totally normal to struggle, they're like, whatever, adult. Or if you say, if you only put up the messages about how it's going, for them, they can feel isolated in that regard, or the perceptions of that. So you put them up side by side. So that's social norming campaigns. And then there's always going to be a need for specialized services. There's always going to be a need for social workers and special educators and hyper-involved parents who are running the PTA. And there's always a place for the few of us. And in that regard, we all fit somewhere in this space. But we have to do it all at the same time. Some communities are really good in the few category. They've invested a lot in specialized services. They have 10 out of 1,000 super involved parents, but not enough others. Others are doing better in the all category, but have not invested in the few category. They push out a lot of information to parents, but they'd have no one really running the parent engagement strategy or the parents involved themselves, using parents as an example. We got to do it all. You can advocate for that. So here's an example for ASU as I wind down. One thing I'm very proud of is that we have started to work with local area high schools right now to help them start or accelerate existing or start new ones, mental health clubs on their campus. The mental health club is just a group of students who care about the mental health of their peers. We train them up in awareness, how to have good conversations. We don't turn them into mini counselors. We just turn them into better friends. They're already talking to each other about their mental health. Invariably, when someone is at risk, other young people know in their environment someone who's at risk. They might not know what to do, or they're afraid that they're going to be perceived as snitching on them, or they're just overwhelmed with the pain, and they just need more information about when to seek help from an adult and how to do that in a way that doesn't, make you feel that you're ratting out your friend and all this other, there's ways to do that, and we can teach that. So we've been partnering with some schools to come in and help start those clubs and do that as a way in that some category. Some students can get trained up in how to train others and how to influence others so that all students can get this good experience. And it's a peer-to-peer impact strategy. And always the clubs need an advisor and other things like that. But by doing this, we're seeding this in the environment where students can make a difference in each other's lives. We're doing this with as many schools that are interested with us. And one of the things I think is cool is we're going to be matching over time ASU college students to those high schools as mentors. So they have college student mentors for the high school students who are trying to make big change in their schools as it relates to the climate of social and emotional difficulties. So we're always looking for interest in that regard. So if you are part of a school and you are involved as a parent and you want to talk to me about it, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. All right, so you wanted to learn four-corner breathing? It's pretty easy. So you pick something with four corners that you can see. And so if you pick the podium if you want. And you just start on the top left. And as you start at the top left, you inhale for 4. Move your eyes over to the top right. Hold until 4. Down to the bottom right. Exhale slowly for a count of 4. Don't inhale yet. Move over to the bottom corner. Inhale, and just keep working your way around doing that. Why this works, deep breathing works for anything. Why 4 corners works is it gives you something to focus on. And a lot of people like the structure of just following it. And honestly, there's squares everywhere. So it's really easy to find, and you can do it really privately. Because a lot of times people teach deep breathing, and they're like, put your hand on your belly, and another thing. And then everybody's sitting in class or in your office, and everybody's like, right? And nobody wants to do that. But you could be sitting in a meeting and feeling upset or anxious or annoyed, and you can just stare at a ceiling tile. Just calm yourself down or get a little bit more centered or put yourself in a little bit more zen space. So there it is. That was probably 40 seconds. And deep breathing, I'm sure everybody in the room knows, is important. It's just a strategy to do it with a little structure because it's very difficult to remind yourself to do it. So sometimes you'll see a square and you'll just decide to do some breathing. So with that, I say thank you, and I welcome any questions that you have. Yes? Yeah, so good one. Extraordinarily difficult question. So thanks for kicking it off. But let me reframe your question. It's a complex political landscape, and how can I not indoctrinate my child, but also not let other people indoctrinate so they can live and learn for themselves? And I'm like, I don't know. But I'll give you an answer because that's what I do. Sure. Uh-huh. Yep. And any advice? Yeah, any advice on how to talk to the kids about it? No, but did the recommendation have any advice in it? So, so my recommendation, without having seen that, what you want to do is keep your kid talking. And so asking them questions is good if they're a kid who likes to be asked questions, and you know if your kid is one of those kids or not. And that changes by ages, right? So I'm not recommending interrogating them. But if your kid's open to that, or priming that with saying, because if you're supposed to talk to your kid, which is a good idea, saying, what have you heard about the lockdown drill tomorrow? So you ask kind of an open-ended question in that regard, and then follow their lead. Now, as it relates to social issues, depending on the age of the child, there's sometimes when talking about those in a more open way where you can kind of flesh out what they think or feel and then be able to handle differences of opinion, that's a developmental thing. So high school students can handle that differently than a middle school student or not. At the same time, you all have opinions about those things. You have values connected to those opinions. All the things that are up there are not disconnected from family values. They all are. And so I also don't want to stop anybody from talking to their children about what they value in the world and how that's related to something like gun control or immigration or anything else. Now, you can talk about those values without it being talking about gun control or gun access or gun violence. You can talk about what you think about things and then say, and this is why we think this about this issue, which de-emphasizes the focus on the issue and emphasizes your family values. Because all of those things are connected to those family values. And people sometimes get that mixed up because it's so difficult and it's so hard and it's fraught with such emotion, those topics. But if you trace it back, all of your opinions about it that you have are all related to what you value in the world. Which is why in the political landscape it's so difficult for people to change their opinions about these things. It's why we're at stalemates a lot, because we're actually not talking about values, we're talking about policy, or we're talking about opinions of those things. When we start talking about values, we can get a lot closer together as a society, and you can get a lot closer together with your child. It's like, in our family, we value these things. This is what we believe. Now, someday they may believe something different, but early children, they're just looking for, what's my family about? Who are we? What do we value? And having strong values in your family is great. And then, of course, then that extends into your feelings about social issues. What else? Yes, in the back. Mm-hmm. So, yes, with a caveat. Developmentally, 4 to 7, you start to see the twinklings of that, but a lot of it is still very egocentric, kind of their world, which is why you get more like young children like cheating in games and things like that. They're not really thinking about what cheating means or anything else. They're just kind of trying to win. My son will we'll play Candyland still, and he'll say, I'll go set it up. You know, now he can count and read and everything. And so then, like, he's like, Mom, you go first. And then she goes, and then, like, invariably the best card is the third one in there. It's pretty clever. So he's either going to be just like a lawyer or a sociopath. I'm not sure yet, as if they're not. Anyway, so that's not really someone not being empathic or not having a theory of mind. That's just him trying to figure out himself in the world. But there's elements where he is being empathic, and I can see that in other things. Less about a certain age range and more about the feeling of empathy is that other people matter. And that works earlier. Like, that hurts, Mom. I don't want you hurt, that hurts them, that hurts the dog. That kind of stuff can be taught, even if the person can't quite understand that the dog has their own thoughts and feelings, or that the dog has a brain that operates in those things. They can get kind of like the approximate concepts on it, so you can start that really early. What kicks in later is sort of the natural tendency to have the ability to reflect on the inner world of the other person, which is much more complicated, but not necessary to wait for in terms of doing that. And that's 7, 8, 9. When you get, what some parents talk about, like, I'm not there yet as a parent, but some people have said, like, the children sometimes are at the sweetest. Not all children are at that way at 7, 8, and 9, but sometimes some get very, very sweet because they kind of, that sweetness of like caring about others and kicking in. My son keeps giving his Pokemon cards to this girl that is one of his friends there. And so it's fine, it's very sweet and everything, but it's like getting a little expensive. And so I was talking to him about it. I'm like, this is really good, but she doesn't have any. And I'm like, okay, yes, it's true. She doesn't need to get any. And I said, but we're spending our money on this. So I was wondering, like, can we think about, are we buying it for you and her, or just you, or what? We're trying to do that. And he's like, I don't care. It's your money, right? Which is not a particularly empathic thought, but it's like this combination of like having empathy for her because she feels sad that she doesn't have any, and then no empathy for us because it's my money. It's like a whole mixed bag. The attunement helps you navigate that. What are you seeing in front of you? What do they really have the capacity to do? What can I really reasonably expect them? And then in that middle school is when you can expect a lot more for their capacity to be empathic. And this is not all children. And some children with neuro differences, it's more difficult for them. Kids on the autism spectrum have trouble sometimes with those experiences. So this is not all kids. But even for all kids, there's ways to teach the skills associated with empathy even before they have the capacity of the internal working. How about one more, and then I know we're way over time, we're way under time, I have no idea. But I'll stop. I'll thank all of you, and then I'll hang out a little bit if people have any last, who wants to be the last one in front of everybody? Yes, okay, I'll take her. Right. Yeah. I know the best person to answer. Yes, they are. So I'll end tonight. Thank you again for all of your questions, your attention, for all the work that you're doing in the community. I'll hang out a little bit if you want to talk some more. Thank you.